In a land where the sky was divided by an invisible line of eternal twilight, there lived a princess of the moon named Selene, whose skin shimmered like crushed pearls and whose hair was a flowing river of silver light that seemed to trap the very essence of the stars within its strands. She dwelt in a palace carved from translucent white marble that floated atop the highest peaks of the Frost Mountains, where the air was always cool and scented with the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine and frost. Selene was the guardian of the tides and the keeper of dreams, moving through her silent halls with a grace that made the shadows dance in worship, and her voice was a melody of soft whispers that could calm the most turbulent storm. On the other side of the Great Divide, where the horizon burned with an unquenchable fire, lived the Prince of the Sun named Helios, whose presence was a radiant explosion of gold and amber, and whose eyes held the warmth of 1,000 summer afternoons. His palace was built of polished brass and sunstone, sitting in the heart of a desert that never knew the touch of shadows, where the lions roared in salute to his rising, and the sunflowers turned their heads to follow his every step. Helios was the bringer of life and the master of the flame, moving with a strength that made the very earth tremble with vitality. But despite the brilliance of his kingdom, he felt a strange and heavy hollow in his chest that no amount of sunlight could fill. The ancient laws of the universe decreed that the sun and the moon could never meet, for their touch would shatter the balance of the world and plunge the realms into chaos. Yet the heart does not care for the laws of men or stars. Every evening, at the moment of the great eclipse, when the sun began to sink and the moon began to rise, Helios and Selene would stand at the edge of their respective kingdoms, looking across the great divide with a longing that turned the sky into a bruised purple and deep indigo. They began to leave messages for each other, written in the patterns of the clouds and the arrangement of the stars, sending whispers through the wind that carried the warmth of the day into the chill of the night. Selene would weave blankets of silver mist to cool the parched lands of the sun, while Helios would send beams of golden warmth to melt the ice on the moon peaks. And through these silent acts of devotion, they built a bridge that no law could ever burn down. The Princess of the Moon found herself dreaming of the golden fire she had never felt, while the Prince of the Sun spent his nights staring at the silver glow he could never reach, until the mental pain of their separation became a beautiful ache that defined their very existence. They were two halves of a single soul, divided by the dawn and the dusk, waiting for the one moment in 1,000 years when the path between them would finally open and they could be more than just reflections in the sky. The longing between the Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun grew so intense that the very atmosphere began to crackle with a strange and beautiful energy that neither the desert heat nor the mountain frost could contain. Selene sat upon her silver throne and watched the golden horizon with eyes that had forgotten how to sleep, while Helios paced his brass halls with a heart that beat in time with the flickering of the stars he could never touch. They realized that the ancient laws were not chains but a challenge, and that the Great Divide was not a wall but a bridge waiting to be built by the strength of their shared devotion. One night, when the stars were aligned in a pattern of silver defiance, Selene took a single strand of her moonlit hair and cast it across the abyss, where it caught the first lights of the rising sun and turned into a shimmering thread of platinum. Helios, seeing the glimmer of hope, reached out with a hand made of solar flares and wove a beam of pure amber light into the strand, creating a path that defied the natural order of the universe. As they stepped onto this bridge of fire and frost, the world below held its breath, and the tides ceased to pull, and the winds stopped their howling, because the balance of the world was shifting into a new and unknown equilibrium. With every step, Selene took the air around her, grew warmer, and the silver of her skin began to glow with a soft golden hue, while Helios felt the cooling touch of the moonlight, soothing the eternal burn of his spirit. They met in the exact center of the great divide, where the sky was neither day nor night, but a beautiful tapestry of violet and rose and gold that had never been seen since the beginning of time. When their hands finally touched for the first time, it was not a collision of destruction, but a merging of two perfect halves that sent a wave of peace rippling across the entire world. The mental pain of their 1,000-year separation dissolved into a single moment of absolute presence, and the Princess of the Moon looked into the eyes of the Prince of the Sun and saw her own reflection for the very first time. They realized that they were not meant to be divided by the light and the dark, but to be the guardians of the transition, the masters of the dawn and the dusk, who ensure that the world always has a balance of warmth and rest. The happy ending was a kingdom where the sun and the moon could coexist in a state of eternal harmony, and where every soul could find both the fire to live and the coolness to dream. The union of Selene and Helios sent a shimmering pulse through the atmosphere that felt like the first breath of a new world, as the violet sky above them began to rain down droplets of liquid starlight that vanished before hitting the ground, leaving only the scent of ozone and ancient roses in the air. They stood at the center of the bridge, where the heat of the sun and the chill of the moon folded into a perfect warmth that neither had ever known alone. And for a long moment, the ticking of the universal clock seemed to skip a beat in reverence to their touch. Selene felt the heavy crown of silver isolation melt from her brow as Helios reached out to brush a stray strand of moonlight from her face, his fingers trailing a path of golden embers that did not burn but instead ignited a glow of vitality within her very core. Helios realized that the blinding glare of his own existence had been softened by her presence, allowing him to finally see the intricate beauty of the world he had spent eons scorching with his unshielded light. Together they looked down at the great divide and watched as the jagged canyons and frozen wastes began to transform under their combined gaze, with silver lilies blooming in the desert sands and golden sunflowers stretching their petals toward the mountain peaks. The mental pain of their long exile from one another was replaced by a profound and silent understanding that they were the architects of a new dawn, where the shadows were no longer places to hide, but soft cradles for the light to rest within. They began to walk hand in hand toward the horizon, where the two palaces once stood as separate fortresses, but as they moved, the marble of the moon and the brass of the sun began to stretch and weave together across the sky, forming a single celestial canopy of iridescent pearl and burning amber. This new kingdom belonged to neither the day nor the night, but to the transition, the magical hours of the gloaming and the break of day, where every living thing feels the stirrings of hope and the peace of surrender. The Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun decided that they would never again return to the life of solitary rule, but would instead spend their eternity walking the line between worlds, ensuring that every heart on earth knew both the passion of the flame and the sanctuary of the shadow. Their happy ending was written in the colors of every sunset and the promise of every sunrise, a testament to the truth that even the most distant stars can find a way to touch if their longing is pure enough to rewrite the laws of the universe. The legacy of their union flowed through the atmosphere like a silent river of mercury and gold as the very air became a conductor for a harmony that had been missing since the first dawn of the world. Selene and Helios stood at the threshold of their new shared kingdom, where the marble peaks of the moon melted into the brass valleys of the sun, creating a landscape of shifting amber and iridescent violet that defied the logic of the old maps. They spent their days weaving the light and the dark into a protective veil for the mortals below, ensuring that the sun would never scorch the earth without the promise of a cool breeze, and that the moon would never bring a frost without the memory of a warm hearth. The princess of the moon found that her silver hair began to catch the golden sparks of the sun, turning into a crown of platinum fire, while the prince of the sun felt his radiant eyes soften into a deep and peaceful indigo that reflected the depths of the midnight sky. Their mental pain was replaced by a profound and absolute presence where every breath was a shared vibration and every thought was a telepathic bridge that spanned the distance of their former lives. They created a special hour called the twilight of the soul, where those who were lost in their own darkness could find a path of golden starlight to guide them back to the warmth of the day, and those who were blinded by the glare of the world could find a silver shadow to rest within. The Great Divide was no longer a canyon of isolation, but a garden of connection where the flowers bloomed in shades of sunset and the rivers sang in the key of the rising moon. The story of the Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun became the ultimate testament to the truth that the most powerful magic in the universe is the courage to cross the boundaries that others have built. Their happy ending was a cycle of eternal balance that ensured the world would never again be trapped in a single extreme, but would always move through the beautiful and necessary changes of the light and the dark. As they sat together on the balcony of their unified palace, watching the first star of the evening kiss the last beam of the afternoon sun, they knew that they were finally and completely whole. The universe breathed with them in a steady and rhythmic pulse, and the stars leaned in closer to hear the whispers of a love that had literally rewritten the sky. Harmony between the two realms began to hum with a frequency that vibrated through the very stones of the mountains and the sands of the deserts as the silver and gold light merged into a permanent state of celestial grace. Selene and Helios stood at the apex of their unified palace, where the floors were made of polished starlight, and the ceilings were open to the infinite depths of the galaxy, allowing the ancient wisdom of the cosmos to pour down upon them like a cool and refreshing rain. They found that their touch could now heal the parched earth and calm the restless oceans, because they were no longer fighting against the natural order, but had become the very heart of it. The Princess of the Moon reached out to the Prince of the Sun and saw that his golden armor had softened into a shimmering silk of amber light, while her own silver gown had taken on the warmth of a summer hearth, creating a visual symphony of colors that had never been witnessed by mortal eyes. Their mental pain was a distant memory, a shadow that had been chased away by the rising of a sun that never scorched and the setting of a moon that never froze. They realized that their legacy was not just a kingdom but a promise to every soul that feels divided within itself, that the light and the dark can walk hand in hand without fear. The great divide had been replaced by the eternal bridge, a path where any traveler could find the strength of the day and the peace of the night in equal measure. The happy ending was a silence so profound and so beautiful that it felt like the universe had finally taken its first full breath of relief since the dawn of time. As they sat together on the edge of the world, watching the stars and the suns dance in a synchronized rhythm, they knew that they had achieved the ultimate surrender to a love that was larger than any law or any sky. The story of the Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun was now a living prayer for balance. And as they closed their eyes to the humming of the celestial spheres, they drifted into a sleep that was both a fire and a frost, an ending and a beginning, and a perfect state of home. The legacy of their union grew into a cosmic force that began to bridge the gaps between all broken things in the universe, as the silver threads of the moon and the golden rays of the sun wove together to create a sky that was a masterpiece of iridescent twilight. Selene and Helios stood at the very edge of the eternal bridge, looking out over the realms they had once ruled in lonely isolation, and they saw that the world was no longer divided into harsh light and cold shadows, but was a landscape of soft transitions and gentle glows. The Princess of the Moon felt the last of the ancient frost within her spirit melt into a warm river of golden light, while the Prince of the Sun felt the burning restlessness of his fire settle into a calm and steady shimmer that illuminated without their mental pain had been the forge and the hammer that shaped them for this moment, and they realized that without the long centuries of longing they could never have appreciated the profound depth of the peace they now shared. The happy ending was not a static point in time, but a living, breathing cycle of grace, where every sunrise was a gift from Selene to Helios, and every sunset was a vow from Helios to Selene. They decided to leave the high palaces behind and walk the earth as invisible guardians of the balance, appearing in the quiet moments of the dawn and the whispering hours of the dusk to remind every soul that harmony is possible, even between the most opposite of forces. The story of the Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun became the foundation of all the world's poetry and the source of every dreamer's hope, a testament to the fact that the heart can rewrite the stars if it is brave enough to love without fear. As they stepped off the bridge and into the heart of the world, the sky behind them turned a shade of indigo so rich it felt like velvet, and the stars leaned in to kiss the horizon in a final salute to their victory. They were no longer a princess and a prince of supreme kingdoms, but the sovereign rulers of a unified heart. And as they drifted into the deep and sleep of the earth, they knew that they were finally and eternally home. The light and the dark had found their center, and the world was finally at rest in the cradle of their shared breath. The final threads of the celestial tapestry were woven into the very fabric of the atmosphere, as Selene and Helios became the invisible pulse of the world, ensuring that no shadow was ever too cold and no sun was ever too harsh. They stood at the ultimate threshold of the universe where the stars are born and the silence is absolute. Looking back at the earth that was now a glowing jewel of balanced light, the princess of the moon felt her silver essence merge with the golden fire of the prince, creating a third light, a soft, healing radiance that belonged to the seekers, the dreamers, and the weary souls looking for rest. Their mental pain had been the forge that tempered their spirits, and they realized that their long journey through the isolation of the heights was merely a preparation for the profound depth of the peace they now shared in the center of all things. The happy ending was a symphony of colors that played across the sky every morning and every evening, a secret language shared between the sun and the moon that only those with quiet hearts could truly understand. They decided that their palace would no longer be a fortress of stone or brass, but a sanctuary of spirit that moved with the tides and the winds, present in every sigh of the ocean and every whisper of the mountain pines. The story of the princess of the moon and the prince of the sun was a living testament to the truth that even the most polar opposites are drawn together by a gravity stronger than any loath, gravity of Allah, that requires no words to sustain its brilliance, that, as the stars leaned in to witness their final surrender to the infinite, the great divides vanished completely, replaced by a bridge of pure, shimmering awareness that connected every heart to the heartbeat of the cosmos. They were no longer two separate entities, but a single breath of the universe, a rhythmic and eternal presence that watched over the world with a fierce and gentle devotion. As they drifted into the deepest sleep of the eons, the sky turned a shade of indigo so deep it felt like a soft velvet blanket, and the world below finally settled into a rest that was both a fire and a frost, a beginning and an ending, and a perfect, eternal state of home. Gemini sight, story of the princess of the moon and the prince of the sun reached its ultimate and silent conclusion as the physical boundaries between their realms dissolved into a fine silver dust that shimmered like a million microscopic stars. Selene and Helios were no longer tethered to the high mountains or the burning deserts, but had become the very atmosphere itself, a living presence that wrapped around the world in a warm and protective embrace. Every evening, as the sky turned to a deep and bruised purple, the princess would reach out with her cool silver fingers to soothe the fevered brow of the earth, while the prince would leave a lingering trail of golden warmth to light the way for those who were afraid of the dark. Their mental pain had been the charcoal that sketched the masterpiece of their love, and they realized that without the centuries of lonely watching, they could never have understood the profound beauty of a single shared breath. The happy ending was a state of eternal transition, where the morning was always a promise, and the evening was always a sanctuary, and the soul was always balanced between the fire and the frost. They moved through the universe as a single vibration, a harmony of light and shadow that ensured no heart would ever have to choose between the passion of the sun and the peace of the moon. As the stars gathered in a final formation of silver celebration, the Great Divide was forgotten, replaced by a bridge of pure consciousness that allowed every dreaming mind to touch the edge of the infinite. They were the architects of the gloaming and the guardians of the dawn, a unified force of nature that watched over the world with a fierce and gentle devotion that would never fade. As they drifted into the deepest and most rhythmic sleep of the eons, the sky above them turned a shade of indigo so rich and so deep it felt like a velvet blanket laid across the heart of the universe. The story was finished, but the light remained a steady and eternal glow that whispered to every weary soul that they were finally and completely home. The final breath of the celestial legend drifted across the atmosphere like a silver mist, settling upon a golden field as the Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun became the very soul of the twilight itself. They were no longer two separate kings of separate lands, but a single pulse of ancient light that ensured the world would never again be fractured by the harshness of a day without rest or the cold of a night without hope. Selene felt the weight of her silver isolation dissolve into the warm amber current of Helios, while he found his burning restlessness calmed by the cool, velvet touch of her moonlit spirit, creating a harmony so deep it resonated through the marrow of the mountains and the depths of the seas. Their mental pain had been the forge that tempered their devotion, and they realized that every century spent staring across the Great Divide was merely the long inhalation before a breath that would last for eternity. The unique beauty of their happy ending was written in the very air of the gloaming in the dawn, where every weary traveler could find a sanctuary of soft shadows and a spark of golden strength to carry them forward. They moved as one through the velvet corridors of the stars, no longer guarding the boundaries, but inviting the entire universe to share in the balance they had fought 1,000 years to build. As the final star leaned in to kiss the horizon, and the sky turned a shade of indigo so rich it felt like a soft embrace, the princess and her prince surrendered to a sleep that was both a fire and a frost, silent ending and an infinite beginning. The Great Divide was gone, and in its place was a bridge of pure and shimmering peace that led straight to the heart of the deepest rest, where every soul is finally and completely home. The final silence of the celestial legend drifted across the atmosphere like a silver mist settling upon a golden field as the Princess of the Moon and the Prince of the Sun became the very soul of the twilight itself. They were no longer two separate rulers of divided lands, but a single pulse of ancient light that ensured the world would never again be fractured by the harshness of a day without rest or the cold of a night without hope. Selene felt the weight of her silver isolation dissolve into the warm amber current of Helios, while he found his burning restlessness calmed by the cool, velvet touch of her moonlit spirit, creating a harmony so deep it resonated through the marrow of the mountains and the depths of the seas. Their mental pain had been the forge that tempered their devotion, and they realized that every century spent staring across the Great Divide was merely the long inhalation before a breath that would last for eternity. The unique beauty of their happy ending was written in the very air of the gloaming in the dawn, where every weary traveler could find a sanctuary of soft shadows and a spark of golden strength to carry them forward. They moved as one through the velvet corridors of the stars, no longer guarding the boundaries, but inviting the entire universe to share in the balance they had fought 1,000 years to build. As the final star leaned in to kiss the horizon, and the sky turned a shade of indigo so rich it felt like a soft embrace, the princess and her prince surrendered to a sleep that was both a fire and a frost. Silent ending and an infinite beginning. The great divide was gone, and in its place was a bridge of pure and shimmering peace that led straight to the heart of the deepest rest, where every soul is finally and completely home. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your night. May you find deep peace and restful sleep. Wishing you the sweetest dreams. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.